All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Anastasia Skavronskaya, and I'm the Director of Player Relations here at the PTPA. Thank you so much for joining us at the inaugural PTPA Beyond the Court Summit. The idea behind this summit really was born out of wanting to provide players and their support teams with educational resources and opportunities to speak to experts in different fields. As you know, this particular summit is focusing on mental health, resilience, and recovery, but we are hoping to cover a wide variety of topics in the future. So we'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas about what we could feature in the next year's panels. Before we begin, I wanted to shout out our colleagues at the NBPA, who have hosted us now for the third year in a row and have been wonderful to work with. So thank you very much to the NBPA for having us again, and hopefully continue to have us in the future. And I'm also happy to announce that we're going to be finally introducing an insurance program with Aetna. It's going to be starting on 1/1/26. It will be global coverage, and it will be available not just to the players, but also to the player support teams, which is for the first time ever. So we're very happy to do that and support, again, not just the players, but also their coaches, physios, and anyone else on their teams. We do have Kay Carr-Wallace from Aetna here in the back, so if you do have any questions about benefits, I should be happy to answer them. And finally, I not only wanted to introduce, but also thank Damon Valentino, our Director of Mental Fitness here at the PTPA, who really spearheaded this event and took charge and made this whole thing kind of happen this year. So really appreciate it, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Anastasia, appreciate it. And a special shout out to Anastasia for coming up with the name Beyond the Court, by the way. Genius. So why Beyond the Court? Beyond the Court, I think for us, is symbolic of the fact that, tennis players are human beings first. And I think a lot of energy is poured into their performance, technical, tactical, physical, and I think we tend to not necessarily pay as much attention to the mental and emotional side, the whole human. And I think generally speaking, if you feel better, if you feel sustained and you feel vital and you feel as if you're connected to your community, to your cause, to your purpose, then you're going to perform better. And I think that's a simple statement to make, not always something that gets as much airtime as it needs to get. And so this is what this is about. We really, as we were thinking about the lineup for Beyond the Court, we wanted to bring people together who are mission-driven, purpose-driven, really focusing on the whole human being. And so, we've had doctors, and we have neuroscientists, and we have athletes yesterday, and psychiatrists and executives that are doing amazing work within foundations. We have clinicians, and so these are the people that orbit around, not just inside the lines but outside the lines, and it's really important, and it's an imperative, and I think it's important for us to think about changing the culture a little bit and making this a little bit more front and center. So with that, I'd also like to say that without our sponsors, we probably wouldn't be doing this here at all. That's Hilton, that's Aura. Rosie's been so gracious here. It's been amazing to have her on site. That's also IM8, which I had a couple of rounds of today. It was really great stuff. And it's Psych Hub. Psych Hub is a new partner for us, and we're going to be doing some really great programming this year together. It's the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, who has been incredibly generous. Raul, thank you so much for being here, and all the other docs that are in the house. And it's the Wise Scholarship Fund, doing really great work globally. And so, Beyond the Court is the theme of this. And so when we were thinking about the lineup for today, I wanted to start with somebody who is internal for us, and also I'd like to shout out the PTPA staff and Winners Alliance for all their hard work putting this thing together. This is a person that I admire, and somebody who's done incredible work for us thus far and has a real wide array of knowledge and expertise in the trenches. So I'd like to welcome our first guest, Dr. Robbie Sick.
Thanks, Damon. Thanks, Damon, and thanks to the PTPA, our sponsors. Excited to talk a little bit of stats, tennis, data, and where we're at on the tour with player health.
Yeah, me too. But I think I'd like to start with maybe a heart-forward question. We were at dinner last night. I was sitting next to you, and you said, if some player or athlete calls at 2 in the morning, it is my responsibility to answer the phone. And it just struck me as like, that's not always an easy task to get up at 2 in the morning, but what drives you to make sure that that's part of your regimen?
Look, I mean, I don't like to talk about my kids and what I want to teach them, but the reality is, if somebody calls you at 2 in the morning and needs help, you should help them, because one day it's going to be you on the other end. And I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I want them to understand that you pay it forward and you do that, and it's my greatest honor to help people. And I told a player today who was texting me from Europe, and she's not here, she's injured, and she said, hey, thank you for help on this medical journey. It's been a really stressful thing. And I said, look, it's my greatest honor to help you. And I love seeing people come back and helping people to do the things that matter to them. If you're a tennis player, what matters to you is playing tennis. But at some point, you're just going to be a human being, and it might be playing with your grandkids, it might be, being able to take care of a parent. I want people to be able to do the things that matter to them. And what matters to you, and that matters to me. And I think that that's just a mindset that we try and live in our household and my family of doctors. We just want to do the right thing. And I think we need more lifting up of others in this world. It's easy to lift up ourselves. It's a lot harder, and it's something that I think we should take pride in helping someone else find success, because that's way more fun. One of my favorite basketball players, Ricky Rubio, used to say, baskets make one person happy, assists make 2 people happy. So that's kind of the way we look at it.
Nice, that's awesome. He was a great assistant player as well.
He was a good player.
So before we get into the data, article published in ESPN and all of that stuff, I want to dive into all of that, but I'm just curious, like, number one, how long have you been with the PTPA? How many players, would you roughly say that you've been able to work with thus far?
So I've been with the PTPA now for about 20 months. We've helped hundreds of players across the tour, family members, players, coaches, trainers, physios, all across the board, because they all need help. But it's in the hundreds of players at this point. I've gotten calls from China, from England, from Dubai, from the US, at any different moment. And the reality is, again, like, we've had plastics consults, derm, skin, fertility, urology, and everything in between. So these players are not coming to me with musculoskeletal issues all the time. They're coming to me with whatever matters to them in that moment.
Right, that's amazing.
Because they're human beings first. You're a tennis player and that's your job, but you're a human being and you have real things, and if your family members are sick or if you have other things that are going on, it's really hard to concentrate on your job.
Yeah, totally. Their 2 a.m. might be your 2 p.m. sometimes.
Yeah, they don't know. They're not looking at, they don't know where I am, and I think Roman and Wajid and you guys give me a hard time that I travel as much as you guys do. I just am not always in the same place you are. So, yeah, it's all relative.
Okay, all right. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the data, because I think that, reading that article, it was number one, I think it was really, I'm part of this community, this culture, and I still felt like it was kind of eye-opening for me to read some of the stats that you had collected. Can you share a little bit about what you've collected thus far about the player experience in terms of their play and fatigue and everything else?
Yeah, so on its surface, number one, playing 3 sets in 2025 is like playing 4 sets in 1999. Playing 4 sets is playing 5, playing 5 sets is playing 6. Okay? Every point is longer, players are running 20% more on court, they're hitting the ball harder and faster than ever. There is more emphasis on spin. We are the only sport, and I can say this for certain, that allows our players and everybody else to end at 2 or 3 in the morning, depending upon the event. It is nuts. There is no industry that does that unless you are an Uber driver. And that is a choice, and that is a gig job. There is no other place in the world where we are cool saying, hey, you just landed here in China, go play in a tennis match 6 hours later or 8 hours later, and then, by the way, we're not going to be concerned about anything else, and by the way, we might drug test you too. So wake up because we've got a drug test. That's not sustainable. So we also know that injuries are going up as a result. And I want to throw this out there because we're at the MBPA and I think it's relevant to think about other sports. If we know that Achilles injuries are on the rise in not just basketball, but baseball and football, why is that? It's not just one sport. We know that arm and elbow injuries are on the rise in baseball. They're also on the rise in tennis. It's not just that every player is throwing the ball harder or hitting the ball harder. There are a lot of factors, and some of it comes back to what we have in the back room there with sleep monitoring. I firmly believe that athletes today have less time to recover. And it doesn't matter if you give them more time to go sleep at home. We have more and more things that are impacting our day. How many times do you go home and just put your phone away and go to sleep? Nobody does that. There's no neuromuscular rest for athletes. That has an impact because it's not the same as resting in 1999. We are on our phones all day, and I am victim to it. We just talked about it. I'm on my phone at 2 in the morning. So how do I rest? How does a player rest? How can you expect that? You're asking a player to hit the ball harder, to play longer, to run more, and you're asking a player to rest less when they go home because they're on their phone. And that is going to have a broad implication across all sports. And that's why we know that in order to truly help players rest, there are devices in the back that can help give that biofeedback and can help an athlete rest. We have to do that, and we have to personalize it. Otherwise, we are doing a disservice to the game.
So you are also intimately connected to other sports, and I'm just curious about, here we are in the MBPA, for example, you have life inside of the MLB a little bit as well. What are you seeing in other players associations or even in those leagues that we can start to draw from?
The first step I think that we saw long ago in other sports is let's ask more questions, let's collect data. Let's start to figure out, okay, what's the most efficient way to score runs in baseball? I happen to work for the Yankees. I think we've done a good job of figuring out how to efficiently score runs over the last 25 years. Now we're in the same space in basketball. What's the most efficient way to score a point? It's a corner three. In tennis, we're figuring out what's the most efficient way to play tennis. And you're going to react to the game in that regard. The problem is when you have these expectations, and we eventually reach the limits of what a human can do, then it's what are the health consequences? So one of the things that we've now seen from our most recent data report are there are peaks where players are more likely to get injured. And those peaks are consistent year over year, and they are now being magnified even more so post-COVID. These peaks usually are around certain time points, particularly when there's a surface change. So when you're going from hard court to clay, when you are going from clay to grass or grass to hard court, and then hard court, and you're at the end of the year. In every other sport, we have either a ramp-up period or we protect the athlete in certain ways. In the NFL, we have a ramp-up period in training camp. In basketball, we don't do back-to-backs early in the season. All of these things have an impact on trying to do something to reduce injury. Now in tennis, if we know that these are the high-risk periods, why are we letting ball manufacturers or deviations in ball quality then impact our risk of injury? If we know the balls aren't standardized and we think that that's a risk factor for injury, let's take that off the table. Let's then look at what are the meaningful things that we can do around that because we take the risks out. So we have to think about how we can risk mitigate, take the variables out. These are simple math problems. I mean, again, I've got 2 young kids. It's all simple algebra. Let's do the simple algebra to figure out, let's take the X out and solve for Y and make it easy to then figure out how to make the game safer across the board.
So you're saying that if we focus on one of the variables in the game, for example, the balls. Yeah. Are there other examples that might fall into that category?
I mean, it's easy to say like, hey, let's not play at 3 in the morning. Those are the easy ones, right? The balls, let's not play at 3 in the morning. Let's really think about like how we can standardize player rest and fatigue. But then it's also, and I think this is why it's cool to work for a group like the PTPA, let's have a mission to give players access to real resources and standardize that across the board. I feel like every player should have access, not just to me, but to any specialty within seconds. Within 3 taps, our goal is to give players access to a specialist in mental health, in nutrition, in primary care, and specialty care within 3 taps. And you can make an appointment anywhere in the world within 24 hours. That to me is important. That's something because, and you and I chatted a little bit about this yesterday, tennis is the loneliest sport. Like, people are truly lonely out there. You train alone, you travel alone, you may have some people that you work with, but one of the things that really strikes me as different about tennis versus some of the other sports that I've worked with, I've flown with teams before. Some of the best bonding is traveling, is eating together, it's doing stuff together. And we don't have as much of that in tennis. And I think that that's really hard because it is an individual sport, or you may have a doubles partner. But how do we create that collegiality? And it's one of the things that I really admire about what the NBPA did in Spain a few weeks ago. They bring players together from different places, and it's not about playing a tournament or a game. It's like, hey, let's just do stuff together. Let's share best practices. And it's what I think the PTPA is about. It's about sharing best practices, bringing people together, sharing concepts, working with other unions. That to me is how you feel like you're part of a community. And that's, I think, something that could really help improve the mental health of and mental wellness of any athlete or any human being, is feeling a part of something bigger than you. And I think it's really hard to do in a sport where you are trying to steal a win from someone else, from that other person who's there, and you don't necessarily know all the stuff that's going on in their life. And that's a lonely thing. That's a lonely experience. And I think as a society, we can do better.
Yeah, I agree. My experience working with players as well, you play alone, you travel alone, you also grieve alone. And, you know, you're the only one holding the racket, right?
And by the way, in tennis, then they ask you to speak at a press conference as soon as your match is done, even after you lost, which again, it's, at least most other sports, they give you a little bit of time to go change your clothes in the locker room. Here it's like, hey, here's a mic.
Yeah, and they'll criticize you if you don't say the right gracious thing after the match as well.
It's nuts. Yeah. It's truly nuts.
Yeah. You know, off of that, I think, well, I was just going to share that, you know, players, kind of a common theme I've seen from players that reach out to me are those that are just wearing those losses super hard and don't feel like they deserve to even go out and have a good dinner, for example, right? So this is where that bonding thing really kind of also helps to be able to, you know, have that sense of camaraderie with your teammates, even if you've lost, you know.
Yeah, and I think, look, that's another aspect of the PTPA over the long haul. The longer we do this, there will be people who were part of it who want to give back to the sport. It gives an opportunity for former players like Nico to help pay it forward to players, and I think that that's really important. And I think it's the same way with the Coaches Association. And we need to collaborate across the board. That's one of the things that's missing, is that spirit of collaboration. But there's always an adversarial thing when you're talking about trying to advocate for rights. But there should also be collaboration that, hey, we're going to make this game more sustainable and better over time. And that has to be the vision, right? We want tennis and baseball and all the other sports to succeed. Let's take those best practices. I thought it was one of the coolest things that happened during COVID. Like, we called Disney, we called the Yankees, we called the Steelers, we called all these teams outside of the NBA to find out, what are you doing? And we wanted to find out, how are you approaching these same problems? Adam Grant has this great saying that it's more important to learn than it is to be right. You're going to see the same problems over and over again in life. So how do you approach that differently the second time? We're not insane, we're not crazy, we're trying to approach it in a better way the next time to help the next generation of players, but the current generation too, because they deserve to have a safer tour. They're going to love the changes that I think we're advocating for, whether it's balls or other things, calling for resources for them to recover. I mean, we're not just going to have more arm and elbow injuries from heavier balls and from slower balls, we're also going to have more oblique and back issues. We see that in baseball. You got to swing harder, you have to return at a higher velocity too. All of these things are tied together, and it's time to give players a tool to be able to collect that data. It's time to give players a tool where they can understand themselves and they can track themselves and ask questions and have a safe place.
Yeah, Adam Grant also said the habits that get you here aren't necessarily the habits that get you there. And I think sometimes we don't even realize what we have habituated. And I think what I love about the PTPA is we're just shining a light on the system and what is, and starting to kind of try to make and affect some change based on what is just commonplace for our tennis ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
Right. Speaking of like the travel part, I want to come back to that a little bit. Like you're in other leagues, and you talked about back-to-backs and training camp and all that. What do you notice is the biggest difference between the travel of tennis players and, say, for example, basketball players or football players or baseball players?
Look, if you just go to the top events, you're gonna have a skewed view, right? There's a lot of other events where players have even less. I mean, I've seen players sleeping on benches. I have never seen an NBA player sleeping on a bench. I think that's wild. I have never seen a player, and I work in a sport where we get impacted by rain in baseball, waiting all day for a match. And then what do you do all day? What resources do you have? Are you being fed? Are you being taken care of? I think we really fail to ask the questions to understand what is the plight of tennis players. And I think what we need to do is really do a good survey for players quarterly to ask them questions. Say, what was the best experience you had at all of the tournaments in the last 3 months? What was the worst experience? Aggregate those, and then from there respond. We need engagement engines to be able to collect that data and then collect that data and respond. But we should be thinking about that. Every other players union is asking questions. What's the best locker room? What's the best family services? And they do an A to F grade. And just because you got an F doesn't necessarily mean that you don't win. There are certain NFL teams that got Fs for the training staff, and they've won Super Bowl. But it's an important part to understand why. You ask the question, why? And from the travel perspective, look, I think with the Hilton partnership and some of the other things we're trying to standardize or give a certain level of standard for travel, but we need to give players as many resources to fly, travel, not have to check in their bags and pay for, carrying all their stuff. Like those are all things that matter, especially when you're talking about the economics of tennis.
From like a medical perspective, what's downstream of all that? Sleeping on benches and traveling as much as they're traveling and all that. What are we seeing from a physical and mental standpoint from that?
I would be really curious, and again, I think this is where we want to collect the data. What's the incidence of depression for these players on the tour and afterwards? We know that there's always ebbs and flows. We know there's always challenges. We know it's probably in some ways tied to wins and losses. But at some level, I do believe that it's our obligation to make winning and losing only one of the results that matter here. We want every person who's on the tour to feel great about their experience and want to give back to the tour. So obviously there's downstream effects for injuries, but there's also, I think, how we develop young players and create those expectations. Like we have to respect the fact that young players the players that are 15, 16 that are coming up are going to have a very, very different worldview than the 34-year-old players who are about to graduate from the tour and go off and do other things in the world. So we need to ask ourselves, how do we give players who are 15 and 16 a sustainable health model so that they don't get hurt when they're 15 and 16? Because if they're getting hurt then, they're only going to get hurt more when they're 30. Bless you. So thinking about the long view, the longest view wins. We have to think about those things, and I don't know that prior to the PTPA that anybody was thinking about that. They were thinking about the shortest term, hey, let's optimize a TV deal, let's get these matches on TV. We're thinking about the long-term health of individuals beyond being a tennis player, being a parent, being a grandparent. Are you going to be able to play 25 years from now? And we should be thinking about that from day one.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like an endurance model versus a performance model. One is transactional, and let's just turn and burn, grind. It's grind culture, and the other one is being mindful of being able to sustain throughout it.
I was thinking about this earlier today. I watched a video with Nick Saban, and Nick is a coach at the University of Alabama, retired recently, and he talked about his record as a transactional coach versus transformational leadership. And he talked about the conversation he had to stop being transactional with his players in the late 90s. And we're talking about a win percentage that was in the 500s versus the guy who went on to win multiple national championships, probably is the greatest coach. He stopped being transactional with his players and it became transformational. How can I make your life better? That to me is it. I remember telling a player with the Timberwolves, and I'm not going to name the name because he'll laugh, but I remember it was December 26, 2019. We were standing in Sacramento the day after Christmas, and I told him, I said, look, dude, I don't care if you never play again. I really don't give a shit. My job is to make you a better person. And you are late, and you are not accountable, and you need to be better. And he looked at me and was like, who the fuck are you? And I said, look, I am here to be in your face and challenge you every single day. And I'm this little Indian kid with bad vision, but I am going to be that person. And I am going to challenge you, and just watch. And every time he saw me in the weight room after that, he was there on time, and he looked at me and he gave me a different look. But when he had stuff come up, he knew that I was going to be there. And when he had a sick family member, I was there. And when my grandmother died, he drove 9 hours for that funeral. And I say that only because you gotta be there. You gotta back it up. And I think the PTPA is really about backing it up with the players and really giving them not just the tools and resources today, but giving them insurance and being able to give them the resources and planning events like this where we want to make sure you know that everybody is behind you. And that should really empower any player to feel good, right? Like if you've got the whole room behind you, for the players that are here, I'm sure you all feel better when the crowd is cheering for you. And all these people are here cheering for all the players to be their healthiest self, to feel relaxed, to feel stress-free. Don't worry, we're here to take care of all the other stuff so that you can focus on the court. That's the fun part, right? When all the other stuff is taken care of, you can really be your best self. That's a cool feeling. And I think back to a conversation I had with a Yankees player last year. I asked him, we were in the World Series, and I said, when were you the most relaxed? And he's like, high school. I said, walk me through a game where you felt relaxed. He went through every pitch in a high school game. He's like, I threw this, and this was the result. And I said, what's different? And he's like, I don't know. And I said, how do we find that level of relaxation? Because your memories, like, I could probably talk about this all day. There's a really interesting study where they asked people at a Taylor Swift concert the day after. They asked about 100 people, what was your favorite song? What was the first song? What was the last song? And about 15% of people couldn't remember any song. And they went to the concert the day before. And how could you not remember the first song or the last song or your favorite song? It's your favorite singer, whatever, you were there. And they went back and they looked at the videos of the people who couldn't remember versus the people that did. And they found that the people that didn't, it wasn't that they drank more, it wasn't that they were smoking, these were the people who had the highest heart rate, and they were screaming at the top of their lungs, and they were just amped. And so I've coined this the Taylor Swift effect. When you are more stressed, when you are more amped, you don't form memory, you don't access memory. And we know this from biology, we know this from the fight or flight response. So when you are in that fight or flight mode, you can't think clearly. I talked to Andy Pettit, former pitcher for the Yankees. He used to listen to the Rocky theme before the first inning of every game for the first 9 years of his career. And he said I was the worst first inning pitcher imaginable. He's like, I was amped up. I couldn't remember, and I would go out there and I would be shit. I switched to listening to different style of music, more classic rock, and that completely transformed my relaxation. I could think through it, I was relaxed, and I was a better pitcher late in games. And those are the types of things that, to me, I want other athletes to hear those types of stories. That it is about relaxation, it is about being able to get out of fight or flight. That is how you compete at your best.
Yeah, and remember that you're playing a game.
Correct.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. You're touching on it right now, but what would you say are some of the most impactful interventions ROI-wise to help prevent some of these breakdowns?
A slow, deep breath. Tell anybody who's in an argument, take a slow, deep breath before you say anything, right? Like just pausing. It's a real great tool. How do you get someone to react that way? because at a lower heart rate, like we know that LeBron James and Tom Brady, they remember every play, and because they practice harder than they play, right? They're able to activate memory, they're able to think more clearly. How do you lower that heart rate? How do you get engagement? So slow, deep breath, meditation. This is where hydration and sleep. If your heart rate variability is at a certain level or you are truly stressed, it's going to be different. So how do you optimize those things? Those are the controllable things that we talk about. Take those out of the equation. You can't control what your opponent is going to do. All you can do is control what you can control and focus on that. Hydrate, sleep, rest, deep breath, pause, ask questions, have resources, believe in yourself. All of those things I think are core principles. And then in the world of analytics, we always say you can do the right thing and have the wrong result. You can do the wrong thing and have the right result. Do the right thing, because that's statistically speaking the best way to achieve the best outcome.
I like how you also say that the data actually provides us with more questions to ask.
Always. The data is not designed to give you every answer. It's designed to help you ask better questions. And if you view it in that way, then you will get more out of the data because you're not reliant on it to answer the questions. Even the genius asks questions. I mean, these are the things I tell my 7-year-old. So sometimes I think she listens, sometimes I think she laughs, but most of the time she listens.
Yeah. My daughter's 13, so she just always laughs.
I think that, but that's an age thing, right? Yeah, so you probably had the same experience at something.
Oh, for sure. Last one. If you could design one change to sort of have the biggest bang for changing just the infrastructure of the game, what would it be? Like here we have a long list. Where should we start?
I think I'm gonna hedge and I'm gonna do 1.5. Okay. Number one is we've got to collect better data, but I believe that we collect better data by asking better questions, which means we have true bi-directional communication and a platform to be able to communicate with players, but also to communicate with the other stakeholders. That if we're really going to improve the game, there's got to be a platform where we're all just talking about what can we do, and we're asking the players, what do you need to be the best you? If you're not asking the players, if you're not engaged with them about improving, if you're not committed to improving, then the real answer is we need that ability to collect that data from the players, and we need to be able to then act upon it in a quarterly fashion, in a monthly fashion. It's not about just being reactionary. It's starting with, hey, here's the way that we're just going to collect feedback and we're going to build a better tour. We're in it for the long haul. So bear with us. We're going to figure this out, but we're going to do it together. And that's been the fun part of coming to a tournament like this, where I do think it's an opportunity to talk to players and take a pulse of what they're feeling, and we need to do more of that.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Ravi Sikka. Wow, in it for the long haul, right there, for sure. Well, it's a lot to chew on. I neglected to also mention that in front of you is a little bit of a program here for you can take notes on all of our speakers. There was a lot that we could have jotted down right there, but I digress. So with that said, there's a lot that Ravi mentioned about the numbers, a lot of data, obviously a lot of great ideas. And it's an honor for me to introduce our next guest, because he's going to share a little bit more about what all that data means from a psychophysiological standpoint, from an emotional standpoint. As a neuroscientist, computational neuroscientist, we can kind of pour over the data a little bit more. I'd like to welcome Dr. Marcello Pigliassi to the stage.
Hi guys, how's it going? Hi, it's working out.
There we go.
Just needs to refocus.
Yeah.
I'm sure this conversation is crazy.
Right,
I need
well-
ideas every session.
Right, I'm sure you do. What stands out to you, just from some of the things that you just heard?
Most of the scientific studies have like this structure, this experimental design, the way it's structured, and most of the recommendations, the practical applications, the way we assess the data, the way we pre-process and process, we follow a certain pattern, right? Everything needs to be perfectly standardized. and then we end up with samples, and then most of the recommendations that we just talked about are based on this. The problem is sometimes you're not part of that sample, and they treat you as outliers. And what we usually do with outliers, we remove them, or we replace that using something called multi-compensation. So we replace you with something that is close to the average. And then the problem is working with tennis athletes, they don't belong to the sample, right? And that's when we have problems and we need more data.
Just to kind of add a little more color, will you share a little bit about your work at FIU and some of the things that you've been doing, your experience, just to kind of set the stage for our conversation?
Yeah, I've been working in the field of psychophysiology for about 15, maybe 18 years now, trying to understand what's going on in the brain, in the body, your emotions, and trying to identify something called psychophysiological states. So it's the ideal brain-body state that could help you, for example, if you're performing, or maybe it's not helping with performance, but it's just makes you feel better when you're in that state. And then the crazy thing that we always identify is that we don't know your psychophysiological state. There is a relationship, and that relationship is usually non-linear, right? So, when you go to the arcade and there is a kind of toy called Blinko, you drop a little ball and it hits a bunch of sticks and it lands somewhere. There's always a perfect relationship between whatever's going on in your body right now, whatever's going on in your brain, and how you talk, how you perform. But we don't know that relationship, and it's usually non-linear, right? And then when we work with people, with professional athletes, clinical populations, we find that relationship, but it's usually not what we are expecting. And then you see people getting more relaxed, listening to heavy metal. And that's when we have a problem, and it's an analytical problem.
Yeah, actually, when I speaking with you last year, I was asking you something about the same kind of question. You said we just don't know, right? But you did say though that there are some basic things that you really want to look at when you're thinking about, say, the zone of optimal functioning, right? And can you share a little bit about like those three metrics that you're typically tracking?
We usually go for emotional states. So we break down emotion into different affective states. So that's your affective valence, that's how you're feeling, positive, negative. Your arousal state, so that's how active or worked up you feel. And your sense of dominance, that's like how in control you feel. If you combine those three in a 3D model, you can pretty much have all of your emotions, sometimes even perceptions, cognitions, and thoughts within the statistical model. This is part of the equation that usually needs to be combined with whatever's going on in your body, because sometimes they're not perfectly related to one another. How your brain's functioning, so activity and connectivity as well. So we can start to finally understand how you feel and how you perform, and then do that for a relatively long period of time, because you change and you're not the person you were 6 months ago. And that makes the problem even more complex, right? Because everything that we could recommend to you maybe 6 months ago doesn't apply anymore. So it makes it even complicated.
I was struck by, I think I read some commentary that you had on LinkedIn last week or something like that. And you were talking about like, interoception, where people are aware of what's happening inside of their own body. But you were also framing it with maybe that's not necessarily always accurate, that we might not necessarily always have an accurate depiction of what we actually feel. And I think you were connecting that with wearables and just collecting data in general. Can we just maybe talk a little bit around how we sense what we feel internally, and then why sometimes there's a disconnect between what we feel, what we think we feel, and what we actually do?
So interoceptive awareness is pretty much whatever's going on in your body, and the question is, are you aware of that, right? And sometimes you are, sometimes you're partially aware of that. So let's think of your nose, for example. It's a very powerful system that you have, right, to sense smells. So you do that 24/7. You do that since the day you're born, and you can contrast with different types of smells at all times. You can connect that with memories, connect that with emotions. You might smell cinnamon and that reminds you of Christmas, for example. So you have all of that and it's extremely efficient and precise, but it would still, I think it's very easy to make sense of why you should have a smoke detector in your room, right? Because maybe you're gonna miss it for 1 second, and that's not a good thing. So with wearables, sometimes that's the main rationale behind that. You know, if I ask you, how'd you sleep last night? I say, it's good, 6-7 hours. But when you look at the data, that could tell you a different story, right? Or maybe it's something that you're not expecting, or it's something that happened in the middle of the night you're not completely aware anymore, because things need to reach a certain threshold to enter focal awareness for you to become aware of that. And sometimes it doesn't happen. And relying on your interoceptive awareness 24/7 might be risky if you're under a lot of stress, because that's when systems start to get a little bit more complex, because then stress, for example, if accumulated, it can distort your senses, it can change your sense of reality, it can compromise your sense of self-efficacy, it can even hide behind emotions, and it can have positive emotions sometimes, and positive thoughts, right? But eventually you experience something that could be more negative to your body.
Channeling players right now. Players are notorious for having like super strong mindsets and just pushing through things. And then also I think most all of us tend to label our emotions as, you know, fairly generic. I feel good, I feel bad, I feel stressed, I feel... Can you share a little bit about, you know, what you developed inside of your own research and just what the science says about emotions in general? Because I think it's a little bit more, you know, it's obviously a lot more complex than I think we tend to interpret it as.
Yeah, there are two sides to this story. One is, yes, we can identify hundreds of emotions in cognitive states, in affective states, and etc. For example, if you think of the topic resilience, right? You can have resilience, you can have hardiness, you can have anti-fragility. They're very similar to one another, and we're not completely sure they exist in your head, right? So they exist in the literature, so we can make sense of that as a psychological construct, and we create sometimes this psychological construct so we can understand the emotions, for example, or your cognitions. But some of them, we don't have that very clear evidence that this difference exists in your brain, right? So that's one important thing to take into account. But it's not as simple as positive and negative, right? Especially because feeling, for example, relaxed, so we're talking specifically about arousal, that's not sexual arousal, that's your psychological state of arousal. Sometimes you might feel, and I ask you, how you feel when you perform your best? And you might tell me, I feel relaxed, I feel dominant, and I feel positive. And then we measure that. And that's not what's happening. After measuring that for 6 months, we see a completely different pattern. It's very related to how you perform, but it's a completely different pattern. And we saw that with players from the PTPA, players from college, tennis players as well. And what was also interesting about that is that we identified patterns, and with one college athlete from Texas, his performance was quite stable for a relatively long period of time. I don't know if you remember that. And then one day, performance just dropped, right? And on that day, his sense of control also dropped quite substantially. And if that was research, what would we do? Just remove that. And then use the average, right? That's an outlier. But working with one athlete, actually, that's your main point, right? That's your main data point that you have to deal with. You have to talk about that, what happened there. And then if your sense of control dropped, then it's okay for performance to be compromised, but we don't want your performance to go from 10 to 0, right? So a little bit of that story.
Yeah, if you were going to design a study with professional tennis players in mind, how would you outline that? What might be interesting for you and also, you know, productive or instructive for players?
I would try to, well, the most important thing is to make sure it's logistically viable, right? So we can't get tennis players in the lab 30 minutes or even like an hour a day, every day for a relatively long period of time. That's not how that works. But we always design things that are logistically viable. For example, measuring some emotions, measuring brain activity. There are very easy ways to do that now with portable devices. We can measure heart rate variability, stress, with sympathetic activity. That's what NeuroSmart does, for example. They measure sympathetic activity instead of parasympathetic activity, and the systems are related to one another, but they're not perfectly coupled. And so we give a different type of response. But also, I would like to have some qualitative analysis in there. Understand how they're feeling and ask questions and have intervals and measure. One thing that we love to do is measure facial expressions. So we ask you like how you're feeling, and then for 30 seconds, you just tell me how you're feeling, and then we keep measuring your face and how you have your micro expressions and macro expressions, and then from that plus the response that you provide, we can actually start to estimate emotions more precisely than if we just get a questionnaire and we ask you to rate how you're feeling right now. So that would be like very comprehensive, very original, sophisticated. I think players, well, I know that players can really benefit from that because we've done studies like this before.
Two more. One being, what are the best interventions you think that players can use to manage their psychophysiological state? And the second one, just as a follow-up to that, is can you just kind of add a little color to the fact that tennis players in particular may need to be in different psychophysiological states for different tasks that they're doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know what they should be doing. I would have to measure everything. I think that's my answer to most of your questions. Like, I don't know until I measure it. If you follow the literature, and the literature is based on samples and linear statistical models, getting into that state where you're relaxed, where you're positive, where you're dominant, tends to be more beneficial. But we just published a study with professional cricket players, and what we observed was a very, very good relationship between your psychophysiological state and how you perform. But then within a sample of 30 people, and they're all professional players playing in the same position, there were 3 subgroups. And some of them had to be really feeling energized, worked up. Some of them had to be more relaxed. Some of them had to feel negative. How do you explain that, right? So you have subgroups within your sample, and the more people you add to your sample, the more subgroups you end up with, depending on the statistical model that you use. So I really don't know until we actually measure and test. And you also need to know the person, right? Because we have different temperaments, personalities, histories. It's very difficult for me to come to you and say you should do that. And even intervention needs to be tested, right? So we also have a lot of AI going on right now. And I designed most of the AI models to correlate, to come up with the best intervention based on how you're feeling, right? So that also needs to, because it needs to change in real time for a relatively long period of time and several times within the training cycles, then it's very difficult to do that with, for example, 100 athletes if you are working directly with them. And I'm sure that you can do a job that's way better than AI if you're working with one athlete. There's no way an AI model is going to do a better job than you designing an intervention for an athlete based on their psychophysiological state. To do that with 300 athletes in real time for 6 months, it's very difficult to do, to have a team behind them. So that's one thing. And the second question?
Just the different tasks within a tennis match, how different tasks inside a tennis match could require different psychophysiological states.
That's a big problem we had with basketball players, for example, because they needed a complete different psychophysiological state for the free throw compared to the rest of the game. Right? It's a precision, accuracy task. It's a closed loop, a closed task within basketball. And so that requires a completely different psychological state compared to the rest of the game. And they need to get into that state very quickly. And so you also need to train them to get into that state, but you don't know what that state is. Right? So we have people going for like a mantra meditation for like 30 seconds, or just like self-talk. for 10 seconds. And that could make a difference if that's enough to get into that state, because sometimes it's not. Right? Sometimes it's not, and you have too many potential confounds in your statistical model. Too many things are influencing the relationship between how you're feeling and how you perform. And until you measure that, and the other thing that's important to mention is that you can never measure and control everything. So you measure as many things as you can, and then you have to identify the ones with the most pronounced effect on performance to work on, right? So you can't control everything, you can't propose everything.
It feels like to me there's a through line between what Ravi was saying and kind of what you're saying here, and that is it's kind of an N=1 situation.
Definitely.
And that people, we need to coach and train our players to be more curious about what they are feeling, as opposed to just imparting a system on them and forcing them to kind of abide by that system, right? And I think that curiosity, often downstream of curiosity, is you're more aware, you're more present, you're more mindful of what you're doing, and therefore there's more self-efficacy, and you're just more interested in what it is, as opposed to we're just gonna grind, inside outs for an hour, right? And I think sometimes we can get onto kind of like a robotic mode for that, or just be in a specific mindset for serving or receiving, or even sitting in the chair, or whatever it is. So it sounds like you're really kind of pulling the process out a little bit more. And I appreciate your honesty about not having some stock answer for what it is that we need to do. So, final thoughts, Marcelo? What do you want to leave us with?
One about stress. We didn't talk much about stress. Just wanted to say the importance of measuring stress, of understanding stress. It's I always say that at the end of my presentations. It's not your identity; it's your job, right? I went to the Natural History Museum today. I saw this head of a Neanderthal from 40,000 years ago. They just studied science about this, showing that anatomically, structurally speaking, that brain is pretty much the same brain that you have right now, right? So not much has changed in terms of the hardware. The software is better, right? So you have, because of language, music, culture, you have a better functional system. But in terms of structure, what you have is pretty much the same. Right? And so sometimes to make sense of the stress that we have to deal with on a daily basis, it can be very challenging, right? Because your brain can understand the importance of playing tennis, for example, right? It's your family, it's money, reputation, all of that. But at the end of the day, some parts of your brain might process that as just a ball going from one side to the other. And so you have something called a stress conflict. Right? You're stressed about something that biologically speaking doesn't make any sense. Right? So sometimes telling yourself that story to me is the same. Sometimes it's an email or in the lab, like why you're so stressed about it doesn't make any sense. So understanding that it's your job, it's not your identity, I think can really help.
Nice. Thank you so much for all of that. Before we switch to the next person, are there any questions? And I'd even throw Ravi back into the mix here as well. A lot of information that has just come your way. Does anybody have any questions? Want to check for understanding? Anything kind of jump out? Big ahas or something you're new?
Actually, so thank you for both the things. I actually want to make a comment about one of the points made. I'm a immediate past president of the American Psychiatric Association. In our annual meeting, I had the privilege of interviewing Venus Williams, and she has really published a book called Strive, and she obviously talks about mental health issues. And one of the incidents she mentioned was she was really leading in a match, very strongly, but she made one mistake, and then kind of dwelled on it, so, and basically she lost control, the control issue, and she lost the match because of that. I guess that's very important in competitive sports, to have a perspective. Maybe you can elaborate more on that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's something called performance variability that we don't really understand and respect, right? So you're not always performing at 100% of what you can. and things are going to fluctuate, and that's actually healthy that things fluctuate. We don't want that to go like from 0 to 100% all the time, because then you're not reliable in terms of your performance. But performance variability happens, so like when you zoom out, you can see things getting better. But when you zoom in and daily basis, like training and competition, you can go up and down quite considerably, and sometimes it happens because of things that you can make sense of, like your sense of control. You're not feeling dominant. You made a mistake, and now you're just catastrophizing. It creates like a snowball effect. It's even worse. Sometimes it's I would say most of the time, it's something that you're not completely aware of. It might be your diet, the way you slept last night, the weather. It's like a million factors that don't really enter focal awareness. You're not completely aware of what's going on, but they're impacting performance. And then it's important to take a step back and look at that from like a third person view. Today was not a good day, but again, this is not me. This is my job. So, be your best friend. Today didn't work. Maybe tomorrow it's going to be worse. But as long as I keep putting one foot in front of the other, things are going to keep getting better. But that's also practice. You have to train that. This is not something that you learn. And again, it's something that there is a system called the inhibitory control system. It's your ability to say no to things that your brain maybe wants you to say yes, right? So for example, you know that you need to go to the gym, you know that you need to exercise, but you want to stay home. And that system is probably the most complex cognitive system that we have. It's extremely difficult to develop, and it's ungrateful because you can just lose it so quickly. It's a couple of days not doing what you're supposed to do, and sometimes it's mental training, telling yourself things that you should be telling a friend, right? It's just a couple of days not practicing that, and that ability can just go away very quickly.
Yeah, and actually just to kind of piggyback as a mental performance person myself, the idea of control, I think we can even expand that. So, we often sort of think about we want to control. Players that I work with, we often do postmortems. You play the match, breaks down, you look back on it, you analyze it, and you're like, what went wrong? I like to do a pre-mortem. And so what would happen if I lose my serve? If I'm serving for the match and I get broke, how am I going to respond to that? And if we create that system before we play, then there is an element of control, because we actually, even though it's not ideal for what we wanted, we had already kind of mapped that out and made a plan. And so we can even think about control with a different lens. That's what I would have told Venus to do. Ladies and
That's called the
gentlemen,
work of worrying, right? You have to anticipate. Even in case it happens, you don't have to suddenly develop a coping mechanism. You have already thought about it.
you've already thought about it, and people don't want to do that. Like, why would I think about the thing that could go wrong? Because it could go wrong, right? And so I think you're not drawn towards that just because you've thought about it. You've actually created a grounded scaffolding for when it happens, you're still calm and cool, and you know your next couple of dance moves. I think that from a brain perspective, I think can make us feel like we still are in control.
It probably will go wrong.
And
It's only a
of
matter of
course,
time.
it's tennis, of course, yeah, exactly. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Marcelo Pigliasso.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we're going to shift gears a little bit here. A lot of data, a lot of kind of big picture stuff going on. We're gonna kind of think a little bit about what might be available for players from more of a mental health side of things. So I'd like to invite up Madhuri Jha, Scott Healy. We have 2 mics. We do harmonize with each other. So yeah. So Scott, CEO of PsychHub, Madhuri, clinical advisor at PsychHub, and also founder of Thriving for All. Maybe take a minute and just share a little bit about your professional experience.
Hi everybody, I'm Scott Healy. I guess you describe I would describe myself as a serial early stage company entrepreneur kind of person, and for the last 4 years or so been immersed in the world of mental health. For the last couple of years, a company called Psych Hub that we'll share a little more about, but we're basically in the business of helping people to better understand what they're dealing with from a mental health standpoint and connecting them to resources that will help them. And we're also, we've created a vast library of training resources for actual practitioners in the space. So one of the things that we're doing is, with this partnership is exposing some of those resources to players, coaches, families in a way that we hope will be helpful.
Hey everybody, I'm Madhuri. I'm a licensed mental health clinician and an epidemiologist by training. I've been in clinical practice for about 15 years. I'm here in two capacities. One is the clinical advisor for Psych Hub. And I also run a clinical practice specializing in trauma and recovery in particular, and a research and technical assistance practice. But I've devoted my career to helping people who don't have visibility get visibility and access to care. I just want to highlight, I think one of the reasons why these conversations pique my interest, I think more than ones that are in academia or in hospitals or clinics, is because this is where stigma lives the most, and we have to get comfortable with socializing these conversations in everyday life, so I'm very grateful to be here.
I'd like to maybe start with something maybe slightly more personal for the three of us, and that would be, how has sports and competition shaped and maybe impacted you professionally, and also just sort of how you approach mental health in general.
Sure, so the topic of mental health and athletics is personal to me. I was operating at a very different level than the people we're talking about today, but I was a college swimmer, D3, and probably the most important day of my life, because swimming was huge for me. It was how I defined myself, and seeing, I have now kids who are college golfers, also D3. It doesn't really matter whether you're professional or D3 or trying to make the high school varsity. If you care about sports, it's a huge part of your life, right? So for me personally, senior in college, biggest event of basically the planned end of my career at the NCAA championships, final race, I dislocated my shoulder on my last warm-up lap before my final race. So career came to a crushing, abrupt end, and I think this was 30 years ago. We didn't have the resources that athletes do today in colleges and universities, and I clearly went through several months of depression after that, and kind of eventually got out of the funk, but it was not the way you would draw at the end of what should be a fun time for your college career. So that's one example. I have several other examples as a coach of young kids and college teammate of one of my sons who attempted suicide because he wasn't cracking the lineup. I mean, it's a brutal world for athletes, whereas people think of athletes as privileged and the strong people. It's as most of us know, there's a lot of pressures that come with it. So anyway, I think it's for me, that's why this is a critical conversation and a critical area that Psych is focusing on.
Thank you for sharing that. Before I share my connection, I was wondering if folks in the audience, if you could raise your hand if you're a coach, handful of coaches, if you're a player, a couple players, and then like support, caregiving, family, is other people here? Okay. It's just helpful for me to know who's in the audience. I have a close connection to tennis. I was a former IMG athlete in high school at the Chris Everett Tennis Academy, and then played Division I college tennis at GW. Anastasia's actually my former teammate. For folks who need to know, she was famous a long time ago too. But I actually found out my senior year of high school that I have what's called degenerative disc disease, something I was born with. I thought I had regular worsening back pain. When I was in Florida, we went to a bunch of specialists, couldn't really figure out what was going on. You're training 8 hours a day, something is still getting worse. And then one day at practice, I had a roommate at the Everett Academy. I woke up with no feeling in my left leg, and I couldn't get out of bed. And it was like terrifying and also really motivating at the same time. I had to have emergency surgery. I was actually the youngest ever neurosurgery patient at the University of Chicago Hospital. It was wild. And then when I got out of surgery, the doctors were like, I had already signed with GW, and they're saying, so you probably shouldn't play college sports, you know, because you have a very chance of relapsing. You'll play hard tennis for 4 years. You'll play, and it'll probably be very hard for you, and you'll have surgery again. And it was my coach, who actually recently passed away, Andy Brandy, who asked me directly. He said, you know, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't have any other way to get to college, so I'm playing college sports. And it was really motivating for me to recover towards that and also learn how to walk at the same time. But I did relapse a year after college, but it was my coach who kind of helped me along the way. It was his former player I actually played for in college. And I'll talk a little bit about how she helped me navigate access to mental health care and some of our other questions, but coaches for me have been a very important part of my entry to this field.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, my cover story is you know, I was a nationally ranked player growing up, and got a full ride to play at Michigan State University, had a pretty successful college career. But behind the scenes, it was my senior year in high school where my ultimate goal was to try to get a scholarship to play at Stanford or play at one of the bigger tennis powerhouse schools. And I developed the yips my senior year in high school and immediately had this feeling of just horror. It was terror, really, where I couldn't hit my backhand even into the net. It was just rolling into the bottom of the court. I was known for my mental prowess. Obviously, this physical size, I had to make up for it with other things. But I snapped. You know, the pressure got so great, and I did not share that with anyone. And I kind of lived with it even through college. It was sort of always in the back of my mind that it could come back, and my solution was to just grind harder. You know, I was gonna outgrind this thing to be able to beat it, and you know, suck it up, right? This concept that many of us know about. So this idea of relaxation and taking these deep breaths, it would have been really great had I had that kind of counsel when I was younger, but I didn't, you know, seek care at all, and I just sort of bottled it up. And definitely one of the main reasons why I went into this field was just how powerful the mind is, and how important it is to support players who are out there trying to kind of push the envelope all the time. So yeah, that's you know, backstory is I think important, and I think it is helpful sometimes to just even say these things out loud. I think sometimes we feel like those things are going to make us feel more susceptible or more vulnerable, and I think they also oftentimes make us feel more powerful. And I think we're seeing that in our culture now, right, with many high-ranked players in lots of different sports speaking out about mental health. So, you know, with that as a sort of the canvas, I think we should think a little bit about, you know, had my coach known what was going on with me, what might he been able to see, or she been able to see from a clinical perspective, and maybe just in general, what as supporters of players should we be looking for as signs that there may need to be some support or care for these players?
I'll take that from just a clinician standpoint, but I'll carry the story through. So when I was a junior, my traumatic stress from being paralyzed in my senior year of high school started catching up to me. And I was playing 2 singles at the time on my roster. I was the captain of the team, and I went on a routine 3-mile run with my teammates, and I panicked the whole time. I'd never had a panic attack before. I couldn't finish the run. It was really terrifying. And my coach called me in her office the next day and just said, "Something's wrong with you." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I don't know what it is, but I need you to be able to play. You need to go to university counseling." And so my teammates actually took me to university counseling. And I learned I was living with severe anxiety and had post-traumatic stress related to being paralyzed. But I think had she not done that, I probably would have just continued to have an athletic demise and not be able to perform or bounce back or even be a leader for my teammates. So she saw something, right? There was something that was happening. And I think the important part of that story for the coaches in here is you know your players the best. You're with them 8 to 10 hours a day. You're on the phone with them all the time. You're on the road with them. You're seeing them at all points of their life. So if there's something that you're noticing that doesn't seem normal, you should probably pay attention to that. And part of the first thing that you can do is ask, are you okay? I don't think we take time to do that often. I think one of the challenges with tennis as well is that these are humans with an insane schedule. There is no break, as one of the colleagues talked about. And then you have to also deal with life. That could be grief, that could be loss of a family member, that could be a breakup, that could be some dream you had that you just can't do anymore. You got to pivot. Maybe you wanted to beat somebody and it wasn't the match for you. But your brain is constantly being challenged on the court. So certain signs to look for. Are the outbursts greater than normal when they're on the court? Are you watching someone have outbursts in a way that they normally wouldn't have outbursts? Maybe they're a stoic player and all of a sudden you're finding them be dysregulated, shouting more, getting mad at themselves. That might be something to pay attention to. The opposite is also true. If somebody is very vocal, they're emotional on the court, and you watch them shut down, and they start to get quiet, they get more introspective, they're not really behaving the way they normally do, there might be something going on that is more psychological. The other things to pay attention to, I liked the comments about sleep. I think sleep, is your only way your brain can actually recover from stuff. But insomnia is one of the first stress responses people actually receive. The other one is your loss of appetite. So even if you're burning 1,500 calories a day playing tennis, you might lose your appetite because you're very stressed, you're depressed, you're anxious, there's something that's really bothering you. In the same vein, things that normally try to help you sleep may not, because as soon as you lay down, it's quiet, you start having these racing thoughts. So those are things I would ask you to pay attention to if you notice your player is not doing what you would normally see them to do. There's a sensitivity to this that I would add, is that in my experience, and I'm sure there's nodding heads here, a lot of times the coach or the parent or someone on the care team might actually be the stressor. And that is a huge part of every sport. It is a huge part of tennis in particular. There's a lot of isolation that's there. I'll speak on the women's side of things. I think there's an additional pressure in terms of your physicality, your body image, how you present, certain elements of abuse that might be happening. So that's why also the peer recognition is really important here. We've had a couple players speak up and say that they were depressed, but we've also had some other sports actually take this on. In a previous webinar, I highlighted USA Gymnastics. The women of USA Gymnastics came forward and outed a really serious abuse scandal. And some of them have still gone on to compete and win gold medals all over the place, right? But they were given a space and a platform surely because they took the courage to do that. It wasn't because one of their care team members actually stepped up and helped them too. And that's a lot of pressure. So if you notice something might be happening, you can ask your friend. You may be the first one to say, are you okay? Is there any way we can get you some help?
I'll just add on as a non-clinician and a non-therapist, not a counselor, but where I found it to be really helpful in dealing with people going through struggling with mental health issues is getting trained yourself on how do you have effective conversations with those people. And that's part of what we focus on. How do you help people have positive motivational discussions? How do you help them listen? How do you help them how do you focus enough on you being self-aware to understand, as moderator was saying, if you're part of the problem. And I think that, as you can go to an expert for help, but a lot of what we're trying to promote is how do you, as part of the support system of the player or any person, how do you support them and help them to get to a good place?
And that's a great segue to the offering that Psych Hub has generously extended towards the PTPA, our coaches, our support staff, and players as well. But you have a mental health ally course that is available for players. There's a QR code on the Psych Hub page there, so you'll have access to it immediately. Let's talk a little bit about what's in that course and maybe how that course can support those that are supporting players.
Sure, yeah, there's two components of what the players will have access to, and again, their support systems, coaches, families, and so one of them is this mental health ally course that has just kind of the basics of what you need to know about identifying when somebody's going through mental health struggles, how to have effective conversations with them about them, and how to refer them to the right kind of care. So that's kind of the baseline. There's also specific modules around how do you do things like foster resilience, which is really important in an athlete. How do you have motivational conversations that help them to kind of come into everything with a glass half full or a positive attitude that helps them to envision success and think positively and not think about the negative. So, and then hopefully this is infrequent, but there's, baseline information on how do you identify and address people showing signs of substance use, eating disorders, potentially severe trauma. And it's just a few hour investment that is very worthwhile from what we've seen. We even have, beyond the realm of kind of athletes, we find people that work in intense environments like hospitals. Hospitals have their intake staff do this type of training, because they're not treating patients, but they're having to deal with people coming through an emergency room with all kinds of issues, and they find this type of training that's tailored for a healthcare setting really helpful as well. So, we're excited about it, and we've seen benefits with other leagues, with college programs, and how this kind of training can help support athletes and win and help them be more successful and stable.
Just to contextualize it too, statistically, most people do not go to a psychiatrist first if they need mental health care. If it's not someone in their own social network, it'll likely be their primary care doctor, their OBGYN, or their pediatrician, which makes the core people around us kind of the most important resource we can have. And again, y'all are spending hours and hours and hours together all day long. So if you can equip yourselves with the opportunity to recognize these signs, and then also consider how that training helps you recognize your own mental well-being. One of the first ways that you can show up for someone is by modeling a practice. By saying, I recognized that I'm starting to have some issues with stress response or anxiety. I think I'm going to go get some help for it. As a coach, as a parent, as someone in the care network, that can be really valuable. The other part, to Scott's point about other kinds of staff benefiting from this, I don't know if folks here have seen Ted Lasso. It's one of the best shows, but it talks about this, football team in Europe, and one of the highlights of that was that it was the kid who was doing the towels and the laundry in the laundry room in one of the seasons who recognized that something was going on with one of the players, right? And had the courage to step up and say, I think there's something going on with you, right? So think about everybody in your care network of your player as somebody who could potentially recognize something and benefit from being able to speak on it, get them help, and be able to help them be well.
I love Ted Lasso.
Season 4 is coming back.
I know. Let's also talk about what the players have access to, the resources in there. We just spoke about for supporters of players. What are the players potentially? How will they use PsychHub as a platform for themselves?
Yeah, so again, these little handouts that have QR codes on them, anybody can sign up with that and get access to a library of, it's a couple hundred little bite-sized 2 to 5 minute videos that are on things like how do you drive your personal well-being, there's bite-sized educational videos on mindfulness, on meditation, on how nutrition affects your mood, how you self-regulate, things like that. So those types of videos, that fits into the category of, quote, psychoeducation. So it's driving user or consumer mental health literacy. And there's research out there that shows that when a person has awareness of when they're highly mentally health literate and they have awareness of what they might be going through, their success in seeking and having successful treatment or successfully overcoming their issues doubles. So it goes from a rate of 30 to 40% success to 70 to 80%. So that's really what this is there for, and it's again, it's the kind of thing you can easily digest on your phone. I can encourage you all to take a look. There's really, really great, engaging content there. And it's had, I think, 30 million views over the course of the last 4 years. So it's kind of proven to be engaging and effective.
Yeah, you guys are popping on YouTube for sure. Also, we've negotiated, you guys have been gracious enough for if players reach out to me, maybe reach out to Robbie as well, just Anastasia, if there are issues that you're finding out there, we are going to be able to custom craft some content to be able to meet the needs that address our specific population. So players, feel free to reach out if there are issues that maybe you're not seeing on there that you're experiencing. We're here to meet you where you're at and want you to feel seen and heard. Last thoughts? What do you want to leave the room with?
Yeah, I would just say I would encourage, I'm a strong believer in what I was just saying in mental health literacy. We can all benefit from just being aware, but for every person, whether your primary goal is to help your player, or yourself, you're going to help your player by helping yourself. Right? So the more aware you are of your own situation, the more your antenna are up and you're able to identify issues that you and others are going through, the more you're going to be able to support other people.
I'd also, I just add, try and think about ways that you can normalize checking in. That could look like a routine check-in on your emotional well-being at the start of your practice day. Like doctor's offices will sometimes have these, like on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being I'm in the pits of hell and 1 being I'm on cloud 9 types of things. But normalize having these moments with your players and your care team and have everybody participate in it. I think this aspect of like community being one of the solutions I think is hugely important in a sport like tennis where you don't have teammates that'll check for you. Your friends are also your competitors. So the core function of that care team is hugely important. So normalizing it is a big suggestion I think you can start today to start to do. And then second, if you have influence on a player, like you are a coach or you're a parent in particular, think about what you're not modeling for that young person in particular. I just want to highlight too, like when you break it down of what a lot of folks are overcoming to even be in this field, it looks like things like poverty, abuse, some folks have experienced homelessness before they get a chance. If you're not in the top 250, you're financially strapped. Even if you are in the top 250, you might not be able to pay for certain things. We're hearing about sleeping on benches. That in itself might actually be a traumatic trigger for someone and you don't even realize it, right? So take time to get to know your players at a deeper level. And you ask them about not only what have they been through prior to getting to you in your care network, but what are they interested in? And, I do this with my own patients a lot. They'll come to me to overcome a traumatic event, and they'll be so terrified that all we're going to do is talk about the traumatic event. And I'll say to them, I said, no, I would actually like to learn, like, what are your favorite songs? What do you like to do? What's your dream for the next 5 years? We do have to overcome this thing, but I don't want you to believe that this thing is the only thing that you identify with. And so no matter if it's a hiccup because they had an athletic failure, or it's a hiccup because there was a personal issue that impeded their ability to be successful, taking time to show that interest in someone is actually what I would call an individualized care plan, an individualized coaching plan. What is it that you do to demonstrate that you're seeing them as a whole person? I think can go a really long way.
Thank you so much for all of that. Your wisdom and your heart. Audrey Jha, Scott Healy, thank you both so much. Let's check the room real quick. Energy level, 5 to 0. Where are we at?
5 is great.
Robbie's always a 5. 5. Focus, 5 to 0. Where are we at? How about mood? All right, cool. Still in a good mood.
Who lied?
Yeah,
Just
right?
kidding.
Yeah. All right, thank you all. We have one more guest this evening, so thank you for Audrey and Scott. Thank you guys. Our last guest, Executive Director of American Psychiatric Association Foundation, Raul Andrews Jr. Come to the stage. So we purposely are unscripting this last segment here just to kind of go with it a little bit, right?
That's what we're going to do?
That's what we're going to do. I'd love to just hear a little bit about just your impression of what you heard tonight, maybe to start with.
It's been real and it's been powerful, and I think that's what gets to the normalization that there is no health without mental health, because We don't have to fake it, right? Let's just be real in the situation that you're one tennis player, or you're one tennis coach, or you're one family member. But for too long, we're talking about centuries, Damon. We're not talking about weeks or years or months. We put physical health on one side, we put mental health on the other. We got to put it back together in one. And that power of one is what's going to get us better outcomes, because you deserve those outcomes.
What's the mission of the APAF? I'd love to just hear a little bit about what you're driving towards, what you're striving towards.
So the APA Foundation is the charitable affiliate of the American Psychiatric Association. The American Psychiatric Association has been around for 180 years. And so they have a charitable affiliate. Our mission and vision is to promote mental health and well-being for individuals and communities where we live, learn, work, worship, and play. And we believe those are the places where if you bring whole health to the table, you're going to reach the most people. And so we are proud to be here, not just because we enjoy the game of tennis, but because we care about the people who spend their life trying to perfect the game of tennis.
What have you seen out there that makes you optimistic?
The fact that you had the courage to do an event like this, and I want to credit Anastasia, because as many of these events as we've hosted or participated, one of the biggest learnings is if you unfortunately lead mental health summit, mental wellness forum, people are running from the room. But what we're really talking about is beyond the court. And so I love that, because it not only gives you a way to talk about mental health and well-being, you could do anything with beyond the court. You know, maybe it's PTPA advocacy beyond the court. Maybe it's PTPA charity or philanthropy beyond the court. The one thing we love about this game, I think Dr. Robbie made it clear, yeah, it is one of the loneliest sports around, but in that serenity and the power of one, even when the United Nations can't get it done, 2 weeks from now, are we all going to be glued to the TV watching nation states represented by one out there trying to do it, right? With a peaceful ending, but there's going to be an ending. And I just want to do an anecdote for you, because the pre-roll to this, you and I had a chance to play, 5-10 minutes worth of ping pong. We weren't even keeping score, just rallying. The dopamine hit for me, the neurotransmitter of playing ping pong. In the first 2 or 3 rallies, I'm already trying to think, I'm going to make him hit a forehand. He's using that backhand. Like I just jumped into it, even though I didn't want to. And I think that's what's keeping my energy up. But that's also why we want to leave some pearls of wisdom about, from a practical standpoint, Dave, and not necessarily a clinical standpoint, how do we operate peak performance on our green days, on our yellow days, and on our red days, right? And so if we can get more tied in and connected to ourselves and those who are around us, what we unfortunately find out is in a 365-day year, most of our days, if we're lucky, are going to be yellow. It's very rare we're in that elite peak performance state where it's green. Because no matter what our profession, if we're green, we're unstoppable. Or at least we believe we are, and our ability to bounce back, that resilience, is so much higher. But the ones who are the true best of the best can operate in that yellow state for probably 200 or 300 days a year, and I still can't beat you even when I'm green, because your yellow is better than my green, right? And then when we're red, as Marjorie said, pull back, right? I don't have it today, I can't go today, and what I don't need you to do is chastise me or berate me because I don't have it, right? If I tell you I don't have it, I understand there should be and could be some consequences. But isn't it going to be better if I just stop? We're at the NBPA. Maybe it's not, Dr. Yu, a 20-second timeout. Maybe I need a full timeout to reset. And we'll come back tomorrow and do better than we did yesterday.
That's good stuff. It's intuitive, this question I typically ask players that I work with, but who's your greatest competitor that you'll ever face?
So in my mind, it's a younger me. Because, you know, in your sport, you start so early, and I don't think you always recognize, and we haven't talked about it here, particularly for my coaches. You know, the brain is not fully formed until about 25 or 26, according to my doctors. But you're expecting prodigy play from a teenager. At 25 years old, I was walking across the stage, graduating from law school, and my life was just about to begin. And the furthest place I thought I was going to be was in Manhattan at the National Basketball Players Association, talked to some tennis players. I was in court, that's where I was. But when I'm trying to get to peak and stay in green, I'm thinking about what's the difference between the way Raw would have reacted at 25 or 35 to this particular situation versus today at 60, right? And so that doesn't mean I don't have competitors, that doesn't mean I don't have frenemies, we all do. But really when I get up in the morning, even when I don't know that I have it on those yellow days, and I'm like, you know what, you promised you were gonna be there, we gotta figure out how to do it, right? One of the things I love though, and I got partners here and I'll close it here, because Dr. Vince here, Dr. View, Dr. Green, Dr. Hankerson, I now have the trust and the truth that I don't have to go because we have 39,000 members and even more allies across 100 countries in the world. I have access to every one of those doctors. So I can be in New York and tell somebody, hey, can you go to Prague for me? We need to do this exact same thing, right? And so being able to, like, trust and truth are fraternal twins. Understand that, know that, and it's going to help you in your communication. Because trust without truth is going to bring disappointment at the best. But truth without trust, which is why we stay in the dark ages in mental health, the hard truths we either don't want to talk about, or when we hear them, we're shutting people down, or we're shutting ourselves down, right? We don't have trust even in our circle of trust. So the community can't communicate, and if everybody's relying on me, if everybody's trusting me, and then I can't go, how many more tens, 20s, hundreds of people are going to get, whole countries are going to be disappointed if I don't pull it off, right? And that's a lot of pressure to bear on one human being, but the power of one can get us there because the power of one is what got us there.
Love to end with this one. So how long has the APAF been around?
So APAF is this version. So the original APAF was 1941, and there have been 9 different iterations of APAF or predecessors since 1941. Our version is 35 years old.
35 years, yeah. And how old are we, PTPA?
5 years, but really 3 years. This version also.
3 to 5 years. What's the advice that you have for us or near infants, and how should we be thinking through our development?
Okay, now this is where I really get to swing my backhand.
You didn't get into my forehand.
I know I didn't, so I'm just going to stick to the backhand. I have what I call Mr. Rawls' 5 rights to prevent a wrong, and it is a North Star guiding system for me. How do we make sure, Anastasia, we have the right people in the right places, doing the right things at the right times for the right costs? And if you reverse engineer the 5 rights, or you skip one of those steps, I guarantee you're gonna know where you went wrong. Because too often in our organizations, maybe my role is not exactly the role that I think I should have. So we got the wrong person at the right place at the right time, and we don't get the outcome we deserve, or it's not replicable, right? So what is your mission? What is your vision? Do you have a strategic plan that's written?
Yes, we do.
All right. Now, is it a real plan, or is it a statement of principles?
For me, it's support and safeguard players worldwide.
All right, that's your mission. But I mean, do you have components? And we'll be happy to work with you as an ally to help you build out some of your pillars, because when I tell you live, learn, work, worship, play, I can tell you exactly how they do that. And one of the things we want to offer, Damon, we also, I know you're working with Psycho, we also have a platform for those of you who went to school in the United States, there used to be a thing called stop, drop, and roll. Right? The stop, drop, and roll for mental health is what we call our notice, talk, act framework. And it is involving some of the things that have been discussed. How do I notice signs and symptoms of distress in others? And when they talk about normalization of these conversations, it's not one bad day or one day stressed out. What I'm noticing is a pattern that's different from your normal spectrum, right? You talked about appetite swings or mood swings. You know, it's a pattern. It's not the first time. Yeah, you had a bad day, you're red today. But if you're having a really bad day for 6 months, we notice that. We're trying to take some action. Then how do we turn these difficult conversations into courageous conversations? Yes, are you okay can be one. One of the other things we found in our talk pillar is to express our concern, not to put that concern on the individual, right? I'm worried, right, about what I think I'm seeing. Maybe what I'm seeing is nothing, but it could be everything, and I'm here for you when you're ready if you need to talk about it. And then act. And the act in the stop, drop, and roll of mental health is, what are the appropriate tools, tips, or resources for this particular player in this particular situation at this particular time? Because what you need in Paris on clay may not work for you on the hard courts of the US Open, particularly if I don't know how you got here, and then you find out because of rain delays and other things where you still got to play at whatever time you're scheduled to play or withdraw. Or you got to pack for 2 or 3 weeks. You might be out in the first round, right? And then you go home, and instead of getting off your device, you're in the DMs, and we're waiting for you, right? We're gonna be in the DMs. Like, don't go look, don't go look. So, Notice, Talk, Act is there. I'd love to talk to you about how we build that out. 45 minutes on or offline can be done on your phone. We've had McDonald's and Wendy's looked at it. Liberty Mutual, you see all those commercials. Liberty Mutual is a client. Working with Dr. Hankerson, we're talking to other leagues, including the league, about particularly building a registry. And I got, my Tri-County, state area, 3 of the best and one of the best social workers at NYU sitting right here. So I didn't bring my folks from out of town except for Jackie Z here, who's on our development team. But, we're here for the long haul, and we also want to talk, and you and I have talked about this, maybe if we come back at City in DC, you could create a little advocacy and a little outreach to go with your thing, and because it's a satellite event, you don't have all the pressure that a Grand Slam brings. Obviously Indian Wells and those kind of things are there as well. But if you're going to come to the seat of power in the world and say you're doing this, who's not going to know that PTPA came to Washington and left a mark?
Appreciate you leaning into our cause here. And I'd like to just wrap up with your 5 one more time.
Right people, in the right places, doing the right things, in the right time, for the right cause. And that time is everything and the only thing. But there's no health, Damon, without mental health. And as long as we ignore that fact, we're going to continue to have the bad outcomes that we have. If we can lean into that fact, then we're going to start getting better outcomes. They'll be more sustainable. And PTPA there's still enough time, believe it or not, even after 3,000 years, to show leadership in mental health, inside and outside the court.
There's no health without mental health.
No health without mental health. You can be bruised, you don't have to be broken, right?
Feels like a mic drop to me. Thank you all so much for sticking around. We ran a little late tonight, but mood was still high, which I appreciate. Yeah, still had a 5 back there. Hopefully you were able to really let a few of those many nuggets sink in and consolidate some of whatever you felt maybe triggered you, and some of that wisdom bring it with you. And please, on your way out, you'll see some red bags. Please feel free to grab one, and maybe 2. take them with you. These are donations from IMH, I believe, yeah. Thank you all so much. Turn it over to Anastasia.
Nope, just wanted to say thank you again to all of our speakers and to all of you for coming out. We have Abel from NBPA back there, who's been gracious enough to not only host us, but actually give us a very quick tour of the facility. There's one feature that I don't think you'll see in any other New York City building that I think you'd want to see. So if you guys please follow along, and on the way out, as we mentioned, please grab one of these IM8 bags. That would be great. But thank you again, guys.